She was the first woman in the world to pilot solo across the Atlantic. Time magazine called her the world's #1 airwoman. Purdue University hired her to head a women's career center, inspiring others to go beyond home economics and learn about engineering and aviation. And she was planning on spending the rest of her life on the ground after one last record-setting challenge, circumnavigating the world. But she disappeared without a trace on that last ambitious flight. What happened to Amelia Earhart? More than 80 years have passed since she and her navigator, Fred Noonan, went missing on their way to Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean. The mysterious disappearance of this legendary female pilot remains unexplained to this day. Join us as we delve deep into the different theories about one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the world and find out what most likely happened. Who was Amelia Earhart? Amelia Earhart was born on July 24, 1897 in Atchison, Kansas, just 6 years before the Wright brothers took to the air for the first time. Amelia wasn't initially interested in aviation. She saw her first airplane at the 1910 Iowa State Fair. She was only 13 years old at the time. She wasn't impressed, stating that it was a thing of rusty wire and wood and looked not at all interesting. Earhart was far from what a traditional woman was like at that time. She loved the outdoors, climbing trees, hunting, and playing sports. She even took auto repair classes. While unconventional, Amelia excelled in her studies and even attended an exclusive finishing school outside of Philadelphia. She just chose not to graduate. She had previously volunteered as a nurse's aide during the 1918 flu pandemic. So she decided to continue volunteering, this time as a nurse for wounded soldiers at Toronto's Spadina Military Hospital during World War I. During her time in Toronto, Amelia attended an air show that featured flying aces. As she watched a little red airplane soar in the sky and then dive down towards the crowd, she felt as if the plane was saying something to her. In 1920, during an air show at Long Beach, Amelia went on her first flight with Frank Hawk, a soon-to-be record-breaking pilot. Hundreds of feet off the ground, Amelia realized that she had to fly. A month later, she started taking flying lessons. She was one of the few women in flight school. To pay for lessons, Amelia worked odd jobs such as truck driver, stenographer, and photographer. The money she saved from working allowed her to buy her first airplane half a year later, a yellow Kinner Airster biplane that she called the Canary. In 1922, Amelia set the unofficial altitude record for women at 14,000 feet. While she still hasn't launched a career in the aviation industry, she was already making headlines. She even did a flying stunt to raise money for a settlement house. By 1923, she became the 16th female to get a pilot license from the World Air Sports Federation. A few years later, she became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic as a passenger. In the same year, Amelia publishes a book about that flight entitled 20 Hours, 40 Minutes, with the help of publicist George Putnam. She soon becomes a celebrity, endorsing products such as Modern Air Earhart luggage and Lucky Strike cigarettes. In 1929, Amelia buys a new airplane, a single-engine Lockheed Vega, that she uses to fly in the Women's Air Derby race from Santa Monica to Cleveland, where she comes in at third place. She also helps found an organization for women aviators in the same year, the 99s Incorporated. It was the first of its kind. Less than a year later, Amelia sets the world's flying speed record for women at 181.18 miles per hour. Over the next 5 years, she sets 7 more speed and distance records for women aviators. In 1932, Amelia marries George Putnam and writes her second book entitled The Fun of It. Because Amelia's merits resembled those of Charles Lindbergh, Earhart soon became known as Lady Lindy. Exactly 5 years after Lindbergh's historic flight, Lady Lindy takes on the same journey. She sets the record for the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, from Newfoundland to Northern Ireland. Within the same year, she also becomes the first woman to pilot solo across the North American continent and back. She breaks this record with a faster flight time a year later. 2 years later, in January 1935, Amelia becomes the first person to fly from Hawaii to Oakland, California. A few months later, she also flies solo from LA to Mexico City, and then Mexico City to New York. By this time, Amelia Earhart has earned national and international recognition as a trailblazer, and not just in the aviation industry. She was an author, a lecturer, and a role model. In her spare time, she provides career counseling to women at Purdue University. The fateful flight. In April 1936, Purdue University finances the plane that will take Amelia on her next and final adventure, the Lockheed L-10E Electra. She called it the Flying Laboratory, which will take her on a flight to circumnavigate the globe, as near its waistline as could be. This brave attempt had the world watching with bated breath. Her husband George Putnam helped her raise money and consult with experts, from mechanics to navigators, for her world flight. On March 17, 1937, Amelia, along with her crew, navigator Fred Noonan, Captain Harry Manning, and stunt pilot Paul Mantz, attempted the first leg of her world flight. They flew from Oakland, California to Honolulu in Hawaii. It took them 15 hours and 47 minutes. However, 3 days later, the plane ground looped during takeoff, which caused extensive damage and called off the flight. A few months later, on June 1st, Amelia made a second attempt. This time, only Fred Noonan was flying with her. They flew east, covering almost 22,000 miles of their journey. At this point, they were already more than 3/4 into their 28,595-mile journey. The duo flew over the continental United States and stopped in South America, Africa, and India before making it to Lae, New Guinea. From there, they were planning to stop at Howland Island, which was around 2,500 miles away, before continuing all the way back to Oakland, California. At 10 a.m. local time on July 2nd, just 22 days before Amelia's 40th birthday, she and Noonan took off from New Guinea, heading towards Howland Island. The flight was expected to take around 20 hours. They were going to cross 2 time zones and the international date line, so they were expected to land within the same day. This was considered the most dangerous leg of their journey. After all, they were going to land on a tiny, uninhabited coral atoll that measured 13,200 feet long and 2,650 feet wide. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed just off the island. The crew was there to help Earhart navigate via radio. Itasca received its first transmission from Earhart at 2:45 a.m. on July 2nd. Earhart made a routine weather report. The same thing happened just before 5 a.m. Itasca noticed that the signal strength of the transmissions was increasing, which indicated that the plane was getting nearer. However, Earhart and Noonan couldn't hear Itasca's voice transmissions. They also couldn't understand Morse code. So two-way communication between Itasca and Earhart couldn't happen. At 7:42 a.m., Itasca received another transmission from Earhart. This time, she stated that they were low on fuel and flying at an altitude of 1,000 feet. At 8:43 a.m., the crew received another transmission from Earhart. "We are on the line 157337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6210 kilocycles. Wait." It was the last time they heard from her. Since they couldn't communicate with each other, the Itasca decided to billow plumes of smoke to act as a flare that will guide the plane towards Howland Island. Overcast skies were likely impeding Earhart and Noonan's view of the small island, making it difficult for them to find it. An extensive search and rescue mission was launched. Ships and planes from the US Navy and the Coast Guard scoured approximately 250,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean, hoping to find a trace of Earhart and Noonan. They couldn't find anything. Earhart was declared lost at sea by the US government on the 19th of July, 1937. 18 months later, she was officially declared dead. Despite this declaration, many have continued to dig deep into this mystery. Millions have been spent by various individuals and organizations in search of answers. Different theories have surfaced. The most accepted and official explanation to Earhart's and Noonan's disappearance is that they lost communication, ran out of fuel, and crashed into the ocean, sinking thousands of feet into the Pacific Ocean. Various experts, including an experienced pilot that owns Electras, believes in this theory. With the gas running low, Earhart would never have been able to reach her intended destination. However, several deep-sea expeditions over years haven't turned up any visible sign of the wreckage. Another popular theory that came up during the 60s was that Earhart's plane crash-landed on Marshall Islands, which was held by the Japanese at that time. The pair were taken prisoner by the Japanese military and sent to Saipan, possibly because they thought that Earhart was a spy. According to the theory, Earhart and Noonan died while in custody. There were some accounts made by some locals of the Marshall Islands that supported this theory. The locals claimed that they saw or heard about an American lady pilot held prisoner by the Japanese on Saipan in 1937. These accounts were passed down to their descendants and friends. But these statements couldn't really be proven. Some believe that Earhart and Noonan were actually released and repatriated to the US under assumed names. During the 70s, a woman named Irene Bollum, living in New Jersey, was suspected to be Amelia Earhart. However, Bollum herself denied these claims, stating that they were a poorly documented hoax. In 2017, former US Treasury agent Les Kinney found a photograph among a bunch of documents from the US National Archives. He stated that these documents were collected by the Office of Naval Intelligence in preparation for the 1944 invasion of the Marshall Islands. The photo showed several people on a dock, including a man and a woman who could be Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. Independent analysts believed that it was likely the missing pilot and her navigator. History Channel's documentary, Amelia Earhart, The Lost Evidence, claimed that the photo was evidence that Earhart and Noonan were alive after they disappeared during their flight to Howland Island. A facial recognition expert, Kent Gibson, supports this claim, stating that it was very likely the missing duo based on the facial and body proportions. Former FBI Executive Assistant Director Sean Henry, who hosted the documentary, even stated that there was a cover-up. The US government knew exactly what happened to Earhart and Noonan, but they did nothing to rescue them. The existence of the photo, which came from a reputable source and validated by experts, was a big step towards putting credence into the theory. Unfortunately, just days after the documentary was released, 2 different bloggers came out to say that they have found the same photo in a Japanese coffee table book that was published in 1935. A time when Earhart was still in the US. A whole 2 years before she went on her fateful flight. The photo was originally published in Naval Lifeline, The View of Our South Pacific, photo album of Southern Pacific Islands, which was a travel book. A digital copy of the book can be found in Japan's National Diet Library, which has the largest collection of books in the country. Without the photo, the only evidence that supports this theory is the recollections of a handful of locals. But without actual definitive proof, it is hard to think of this scenario as truth. So, what most likely happened to Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan? The most compelling theory to date is the castaway theory. Earhart and Noonan may have continued further south along the 157-337 line when they couldn't find Howland Island. Due to low fuel, they made an emergency landing on nearby Gardner Island, now known as Nikumaroro. This remote Pacific atoll was uninhabited. According to the theory, the pair may have lived there as castaways before eventually dying of thirst. There is plenty of evidence to support this theory. The US Navy planes that flew over the island a week after Amelia's disappearance didn't see any sign of the pilot or her navigator. But they did report that there were signs of recent habitation, something that should not be present since the island has been uninhabited since 1892. In addition, radio operators reported receiving distress calls coming from this area over the next 10 days after Earhart's disappearance. It is believed that some of them could have been sent by Earhart. If that was true, then it further proves that the plane didn't crash and sink in the Pacific Ocean. Instead, it was probably on dry land and relatively intact. Otherwise, the radio wouldn't have worked. Nikimaroro is surrounded by a long, flat coral reef barrier that is revealed when the tide is especially low. Earhart could have landed the plane there and radioed for help up for a week before they either died of thirst or the plane was washed away by the tide. So when the US Navy planes flew over the island, no signs of the plane or the castaways could be found. There is other evidence that supports the castaway theory. Later that year, a British party went to Nikimaroro to explore it for the purpose of colonizing the island. One of the officers, Eric Bevington, saw what he thought to be an overnight bivouac. In simpler terms, he saw some form of temporary shelter. In a photograph that he took of the shoreline, an unidentified object could be seen. TIGAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, thinks that it might be the landing gear of a plane. The island was eventually colonized in 1938. Colonists reported that they found airplane parts on the island. In 1940, the colonial administrator, Gerald Gallagher, found 13 bones that were buried near campfire remains, as well as the remnants of 2 shoes, a man's and a woman's, and a box for storing a sextant, which is a navigation device. The bones were examined and measured by colonial doctors, who declared that they came from a short European male based on their measurements. The bones were subsequently lost. However, TIGAR had the photos of the bones examined by an expert in 1998. It is now believed to belong to a woman of European ancestry with a height of 5'7" to 5'8", quite similar to that of Earhart. In 2018, the bone measurements underwent forensic analysis conducted by anthropologists from the University of Tennessee. According to the university's statement at the time, the results showed that the bones have more similarity to Earhart than to 99% of individuals in a large reference sample. There have been 12 expeditions launched by TIGAR since 1989. Throughout these visits, there have been artifacts recovered by the team that strongly suggest an American woman from the 1930s had inhabited the island at some point. These artifacts include a makeup box, a woman's moisturizer that was popular in the US, and a jacket zipper. Glass bottles from the 1930s have also been discovered at the site. Several campfires and the remains of some animals, birds, fish, and clams indicated that someone had eaten their food there. And based on the fact that the fish heads weren't eaten, the person who was there probably wasn't from the Pacific Islands. In 2022, researchers from Penn State's Radiation Science and Engineering Center, RSEC, used advanced imaging techniques to examine a metal plate that was recovered from the shores of Nikimaroro Island in 1991. They found never-before-seen letters and numbers that could help identify where the plate came from, if it came from Earhart's plane. The hypothesis is that the panel is a metal patch that was fitted to the plane when it was being repaired after the first failed flight attempt. The code could be from the manufacturer. Whether the panel came from Earhart's plane or not has yet to be revealed. After more than 80 years of searching, the mystery remains unsolved. That being said, most of the evidence suggests that becoming a castaway on Nikimaroro Island was most likely the fate of the legendary female aviator Amelia Earhart. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.